Hello, Mike.
Good morning, and it is a nice morning down here on Cape Cod. Beautiful.
It's going to be beautiful today. It's a golf day today.
I don't know if I'm going to get there, but I got to tell you, it was fun to watch the Bruins do what they did so well all year long and clinch that record. And you know what? I loved Marchand's comments after the game. It was just perfect. Here's a guy that's got no goals in 17 games, and he's laughing about it and talking about what a great accomplishment they have, but it doesn't mean anything, and the bigger picture lies ahead.
Yeah.
And it was just perfect for him. It showed his, everybody talks about how crazy he is, but it was a really leadership type comment.
Yeah,
and then the coach comes on, by the way, and he steps to the podium and he talks about the record and he waxes poetic about the Montreal Canadiens that they surpassed, and he talks about not getting into the games when he was a kid because they were so good and so popular, and they'd win games that he could only go to. They'd win by 11-0, and he mentions all the Hall of Famers in that team in 1977. He talks about the great Scotty Bowman and his mentor, and I couldn't hear the question, but then he said, "Well, Don Cherry." And then he lifted up his hands. Remember the game in 1979 when Don Cherry lifted up his hands and, he was mocking the crowd. I think because I couldn't see it because I was facing the other way, but he was sort of mocking the penalty call for too many men on the ice, I think.
Yeah.
And that was the video. And I'm not sure why he did that, but he answered a question and said, "Don Cherry?" And he said, "Oh, no, it wasn't his fault." Huh. And, he chuckled in a sort of derogatory fashion. And I want to just say this, Jim, or as I would call him on Ted Lasso, the Wonder Kid. I want to say this is a wonderful year he had, but Don Cherry was an unbelievable coach. And we put together a great team that was entertaining. And we had not 9 Hall of Famers, but we had a lunch pail gang that played the storied Montreal franchise dynasty 3 years in a row, came within a whisker before we imploded with that too many men in the ice game. But I'm proud of that team.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of, what we did. And, you can kiss my wide, old, ample Boston Bruins ass for mocking that team, jerk.
There you go. Standing up for his squad.
Yep. I like it.
Gang, gang.
Well, listen, I mean, since you played in that era, when you look at comparing this Bruins team and what they did to that Canadiens team, is there a question about the record because, of the 3-on-3 opportunity and the shootout? And does that...
It's a different era. It doesn't really, what's the point? I mean, I guess you could argue it. They only played 80 games, as the coach pointed out. But there was a great team with 9 Hall of Famers. How can you top that? If you come back to me in about 15 years and say that Lindholm, Ullmark, McAvoy, Bergeron, Marchand, Pasternak, Krejci, Taylor Hall all made the Hall of Fame, that would be the equivalent of that team back then. But it was different. It was a different time, and they were a great team, and we were a worthy opponent, and fell a little bit short. And I tip my cap to today's group, and I hope they go on and win a Stanley Cup, and I hope on the day of the Duck Boat Parade, Jim has diarrhea.
Oh, gosh. What that's bad karma, Mike.
Mike, can you just stay on for the rest of the year?
We were talking earlier about coaching and, how much it has to do with your success in the playoffs, and I think Wiggy was saying not much, but I mean, certainly setting those lines and setting those pairings is a big part of it. And in your mind is essentially, I think you have the first 3 lines pretty well set the way they are. Is it really in your mind a question about what he does when it comes to that 4th line?
The left wing slot, I was talking to Kevin DuPont yesterday about this, and probably it might be opponent related. Like if you're playing the Islanders, which is kind of a mucky muck group, you might want to have a guy like Foligno in there.
Yeah.
But you're not going to put him in there for, sentimental reasons. I mean, a great guy, had a good year, But Trent Frederick had 16 goals, and Lauko can really skate like the wind, and he's a visible player. So he's got, listen, pretty much now since Don Cherry has added Hampus Lindholm, he's added Pavel.
Not Don Cherry. He's still at
Don Sweeney. Oh, sorry, I misspoke. I'm focused in, man. Don Sweeney added, Hampus Lindholm. He added Pavel Zacha, and then since the season began, all of a sudden the two goaltenders have become the Great Wall of China, and then he adds at the deadline Orlov, Bertuzzi, Hathaway. I mean, a blind man could fix this lineup.
Mike, when you say
is that a bad thing to say? Should I take that back?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
That's pretty obvious. When you say kind of you're focused in on this, Scheim had a great question the other day. If the Bruins are able to win the Stanley Cup, will they go down, now just Boston alone, will they go down as the greatest Boston sports franchise ever, like season-wise?
Well, it'd be hard to argue against it. There have been so many great teams. I mean, whether it's Red Sox or Celtics that I grew up with, and Bill Russell and your guy Brady. I mean, they were incredible teams. I don't need to sort of mark them as 1, 2, or 3. I can enjoy them as any one of them. This is going to be even if they don't win it, it's going to be a memorable season for the ages, and hopefully it will end with the appropriate crown. But it's going to be hard to say that this team is not one of if not the most memorable season of all time. Should they win it, it's certainly one of them. And I mean by one, I mean in the top 2 or 3.
Mike, I know you just brought up the Islanders. So in your mind, do you think the Panthers are an easier road for the Bruins, or does it really not matter because the Bees are so good?
I think they should win against either opponent, but I don't like the matchup with the Islanders as much because they can be annoying. They stick in your face, and they've got a good goaltender that could steal games. And when you have a goaltender that maybe, especially the first game of a series, if you steal a game of the series, it breathes believability into your lineup. And then all of a sudden you find yourself, and I know you guys have seen this, a team that you don't think is going to be any good becomes a different animal because they find a different reason for being. And so I prefer to stay away from that kind of mucky-muck team and go to a more loosey-goosey, more offensive kind of team, and a team that has had goaltender issues. We thought they were going to be terrific in goal, but then all of a sudden there was an implosion of problems. I'd much rather see them play the Panthers, but we'll see.
Mike, I know a lot of people, especially around here, feel confident that Bruins should get to the Stanley Cup Finals. You go look at the Western Conference. Any chance that Edmonton could get there, where you could, where we could actually now see, Connor McDavid playing, in the Stanley Cup Finals?
They've been one of, if not the hottest team, including the Bruins, since I don't know when, mid-February. They've been amazing, and I don't love their goaltending, but I mean, they have so much offense, they have so much creativity. The greatest player in the game belongs to them, and you might even talk about Draisaitl as being the second best offensive player in the game. They have a lot to contend with, and they play a different style. And talk about the Bruins playing with pace. The Western Conference plays at a different level of pace. They're a lot more wide open, a lot more rambunctious, and there are questions about that team on the blue line and in goal. But man, they're going to be a handful for anybody they face, and so will Colorado, who's now on a bit of a roll.
Mike, on the Subaru of New England text line, a question for you about Montgomery, and this texter says that you have given him zero credit all year.
Well, that's a bunch of baloney. Tell the Subaru guy to get lost. I think he's done a fine job. I mean, listen, you can't blame. I got to give him tons of credit, and he's been, he instituted a much more loose program for their defense. And by the way, their defense has not been very effective on the power play. I think they've scored, DuPont mentioned to me yesterday, I think like 4 or 5 goals all year long, which is just remarkable. But listen, they're loose, they're happy, they're feeling good about themselves. I give them a ton of credit. I just don't want to hear them mock one of my favorite people on the planet and one of the great coaches that the Bruins have ever had.
Mike, in your mind, do you think Patrice has already made up his mind? Or do you think, actually, does it depend on if they win a Stanley Cup? If they win, maybe Patrice calls it a career. If they lose, he comes back for another go at it.
Is he going to come back again for another discount? I mean, that would be hard for me to accept if I were him. But I wonder, is he playing in Montreal tonight? Did he make the trip to Montreal?
He made the trip. Krejci and
right. And
Linus
so is this
didn't.
their sort of his last chance to say goodbye to Montreal, or is he that's sentimental? I don't know, but I feel like he had trouble saying yes coming back. It's going to be difficult, especially if they manage to run the table in the postseason, to duplicate this kind of a year. It'd be nice to go out on top, but we've seen guys that want to hang around for one last kick at the can, and maybe if the case is right, a third cup instead of just 2. But he doesn't need it. He's had plenty of injuries. And, maybe Mrs. Bergeron says, listen, your melon is still intact. Come on home, Patrice.
Curtis's lead this morning was about the pressure on Jason Tatum to win one. Is there particular pressure on anybody on this Bruins team? Is it on David Pastrnak? Is there anybody that you see that really needs to win one here?
The expansive depth makes it less of a problem. It's not a 1-line team. It's not a 2-line team. It's really a 4-line team. And, but yes, Pastrnak will get special attention. He's been resilient. I think he's played in every game this year. And I think he's shown that he can take a hit, give a hit, and still wind up scoring some goals. I think he'll, like all great players, they sometimes run hot and cold in the playoffs, but he's a guy to watch. But maybe more importantly, it looks as if Ullmark is the horse that the coach, and I give him credit for having a good year, Subaru guy. Ullmark is going to be the guy, and he's not proven it in the playoffs. And it's a slog. It's a lot of hard work. There's a lot of pressure. There's a lot goes. The wheels start turning, and he's never experienced this. So that to me is going to be a particular question, and it's even more of a question now that it seems like he's become the anointed one for the postseason.
There were so many stars throughout the season, guys, that we didn't expect to kind of Jake DeBrusk making a comeback after last season. Pasta, obviously. Then you've got Linus and Jeremy, Montgomery, even guys like Bertuzzi, the addition of him. Do you have one guy, whether it's a coach, a goalie, or just another guy on the team, that's the star of the show when you look back at this season?
For my money, the acquisition of Lindholm turned things around in the right direction, and this guy is, I know Erik Karlsson at San Jose scored 100 points, but he doesn't kill penalties and he doesn't play defense. And if you ask me which guy would I'd rather have on my team, I'd say Lindholm, because he's multifaceted. He exits the zone, he plays defense properly, positionally. He manages to find ways to find the right outlet pass and then join the rush. He's been effective offensively without relinquishing his defensive responsibilities. He's been, to have 2 number 1 defensemen hasn't happened on the Bruins since, for 11 games they had both Bobby Orr and Brad Park, but that's a millennium ago.
Mike, I want to kind of bring you back a little bit, because I know it's a little bit different time where we talked about Bergeron and potentially, coming back. I mean, you were in a similar situation. You were a younger player, but going to back-to-back Stanley Cups. So let's say this year they don't win it. What's that feeling like for maybe guys like Krejci or Bergeron that know they're on a good team and could make another run at it next year? on their decision on whether to come back? I mean, were there any guys that were kind of later in their careers when you played and were in that situation?
I don't recall anybody that was like teeter-tottering on coming back or whether the team didn't want them to come back. But I know that, first year I played, we were in the Stanley Cup Finals against that Canadian team. Second year, we lost in 4 games the first year. We lost in 6 games the second year. And the third year was too many men on the ice. And every year, this team that we were facing, one of the great dynasties of all time, presented a challenge that we relished. And that meant everybody. This was the Mount Everest of the hockey world. And, we climbed it to the very top before we slipped on some sort of a rock and fell away. And it was, but to answer the question, I think everybody wanted to try it again. Everyone felt we were so close, and despite their vast array of talent, that somehow we could manage to push ourselves through, and we damn near did.
Mike, one more tonight, and then the playoffs are here, and we will, speaking of relishing things, we will relish the opportunity to speak to you all throughout the playoffs. So thanks for joining us today. We'll talk to you next week.
All right, kids. See ya.